of impromptu press conference there talking about how they feel about the trial, how they feel former President Trump is being treated. They say he's being persecuted. They say, let the voters decide in November about who will be the next president. They citing this prosecution as purely political. Those are some of the criticisms that you have heard throughout the duration of this. What's so interesting, and we're going to get into a lot of this 2024 presidential election news a little bit later on, is that some reporters, some analysts are describing some of these visits by some of these lawmakers like Senator J.D. Vance as somewhat of a litmus test, somewhat of an audition as they, we know, it's been reported, are on the VP list. We call it the Veep stakes here for who Trump might choose as his running mate. We know last week, Florida Senator, the Republican Rick Scott, he was in New York also speaking to the media, accompanying the former president on one of the days of the trial. And it's been reported by other outlets that Vivek Ramaswamy might be there alongside him this week. So we'll just have to wait and see whether or not this is shaping up to be some type of litmus test as the former president has to make his decision about who he wants to be his running mate. In the meantime here, let's bring into the conversation our friend legal analyst Nima Rahmani. He's been helping us make sense of each of the day's testimony. I was off last week. Let's pick it back up right where we got to here. Nima, thanks so much for being with us. You know, you and I, for the duration of this 3+ weeks, have been talking about the Michael Cohen testimony. What's it going to be like? Will he be deemed a credible witness? Will he not be deemed a credible witness? What's his performance going to be like? Your overall impressions before we get into kind of the legal nitty-gritty here. How was he as a witness?
Well, day one was better than I expected. He was calm. He was collected. You know, he wasn't the belligerent Michael Cohen that we've seen. And obviously, he was getting softballs from the prosecution. But I think he did a good job of getting out ahead of some of those bad facts. We all know that he's a convicted felon and an admitted liar, and he did a decent job explaining that testimony. But really, none of it's going to matter until cross-examination starts as early as tomorrow. How well is Cohen going to hold up on cross? And I think the other thing that the prosecution did a good job today is corroborating some of that testimony. Obviously, we heard the recording, and the defense is going to argue that it was doctored and Trump didn't know that he was being recorded. But if jurors believe that, again, that's at least some independent evidence of a deal involving Karen McDougal. And then the prosecution did a good job of getting into those call logs, right? Phone calls, many of which were with Hope Hicks and Alan Weisselberg, again, to sort of back up some of the things Cohen is saying, because we know that cross starting tomorrow is going to be aggressive, it's going to be brutal, and it'll be interesting to see if Cohen maintains that composure.
You know, Nima, one of the kind of line of questioning that I've posed to you throughout this is, what did Trump know, and when did he know it, and what did he not know about the entire payment scheme itself? Do you think today Cohen outlined the fact that Trump was there every step of the way of the decision-making process about how this payment scheme was going to be done here? And I want to lay out that theory that the prosecution did today as well with these tweets here. Erica Orden, she's a great resource. She covers all things New York courts for Politico. She says this is her assessment. In perhaps the most critical testimony of the day, Cohen said that during a meeting in Trump Tower in mid-January 2017, Trump personally participated in and approved a plan to reimburse Cohen for the money he paid to Stormy Daniels. Now, that's a reimbursement question. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now, she also goes on to say that the prosecutor, Susan Hoffinger, asked if Cohen would have set up the payment without Trump's approval. Cohen said no, quote, because everything required Trump's sign-off. He said, on top of that, he said, I wanted the money back. Erica also goes on to say this. Cohen testified that on October the 26th, 2016, he went to First Republic, that's a bank, to set up an account to pay Stormy. Just before he went to the bank, he called Trump and said, quote, I wanted to ensure that once again, he approved what I was doing because I required approval from him on all of this. Now, Nima, we in the media and reporters and so many have kind of characterized Cohen's job, Cohen's relationship as the fixer. Now, that would maybe connote that Cohen might have been leading the charge all along, but, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong here, did it seem like that was the case, or did it seem like Cohen had to keep waiting for approval, had to keep waiting for, the sign off on all of this from his boss. It seemed like to me the fixer didn't have that much power here.
Oh, I agree with you, Andrew. And if you believe Michael Cohen, he directly implicated Trump. And I say directly because this is direct evidence of Donald Trump's involvement. Again, assuming you believe Michael Cohen. We previously heard about folks in the accounting department who said that Donald Trump had to personally approve checks and he would sign with Sharpies and felt tip pens, and he must have known what was going on. That's circumstantial evidence of Trump's knowledge and intent. But here, for the first time, we're hearing it directly from Michael Cohen, and he's saying Donald Trump absolutely knew what he was doing. And if the jurors believe him, that's enough to convict.
So the fact that, it did seem like, at least today in Cohen's testimony, that, he outlined Trump was calling the shots for the, whole thing. So what does that do? How does that present an issue for the defense? Does that make their job harder?
Well, it makes it a lot harder. And it's not just Stormy Daniels, right? We heard about Karen McDougal. We heard about the $150,000. We heard about the $30,000 payment to the doorman for the alleged illegitimate child. So you're hearing about Donald Trump's involvement in 3 different schemes to kill stories. And obviously, we know that the reimbursement applies to just one of them. But circumstantially, we're hearing a lot of evidence that Trump was involved in all of this, 3 different schemes, and he was the one calling the shots.
And you could also make the argument that the lengths Michael Cohen had to go through to just get reimbursed for the initial payment, essentially signing off on all of these people above him, does that kind of diminish this aura of invincibility around Michael Cohen at the time that he was calling the shots, not Trump?
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, you have that paper with the handwritten notes from Alan Weisselberg showing the true-up, right, why he was paid more. You have Cohen testifying that he had to do this all behind his wife's back. He had to get this line of credit on his home and create this new entity, a new bank account, because she was checking the finances as well. So I don't think his testimony today leads anyone to believe that he was calling the shots if he had to hide all of this from even his wife.
Okay, let's go back to something, we've been trying to see whether or not the prosecution can prove here. Did this amount, to an in-kind campaign contribution during the 2016 presidential campaign? So is this purely just a matter of business integrity? What was the payment listed as in the ledger? Or did they get to any, more of the answer on whether or not this did help Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential campaign or not? Is this just purely a business integrity case, Nima?
Well, potentially, but, there's going to be jury instructions, and this is hard for a lot of folks to understand, but under the law, any benefit to the campaign has to be disclosed, has to be documented. Otherwise, it's an unlawful campaign contribution. So it doesn't have to be money to the campaign. If you give something of value that helps the campaign, that's a contribution. Now, a lot of folks don't understand this or agree with this, but this is the state of the law. So this is an instruction that the jurors are going to have to sort through at the end of the case. Cohen, to the extent that he killed this story, did provide something of value to the campaign. So that's the campaign contribution part of it. And of course, we know the false records, that's more straightforward. Was this a legal expense or was this reimbursement? And that's why some of the testimony today about Cohen being Trump's personal lawyer after the election, I think the defense is going to try to spin that and say, yeah, these payments, the series, these were actually advanced legal fees to Michael Cohen for legal work.
I see, yeah. And it was interesting, too, because I'm always fascinated by getting this, snapshot into the, conversations that are happening in real time, the personal ones between Trump and Cohen, and the fact that, all of these conversations were being had during the campaign. I mean, this was just days before the election, and they kind of used the Karen McDougal payment as somewhat of a blueprint for the Stormy Daniels payment. Did you catch on to that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the $150,000, and, there was a $25,000 amount for some magazine work that McDougal was doing, but that sort of set the going rate for these types of payments, right? Originally, the payment to Stormy Daniels, I believe, was supposed to be the same amount. There was some negotiation, and that's how we ended up at the 130. And it was fascinating to hear, again, if you believe Michael Cohen, Trump's view on all this. He said, this has to happen before the election because after I'm elected, It's not going to matter. I don't care what people say about me. I just don't want to lose those women voters. And if I lose, I won't care about this either. So this story has to be killed before the election. Otherwise, regardless of what the result is, I don't care, and it can get out.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see because I want to juxtapose the Cohen testimony with David Pecker. David Pecker was asked, whether or not Trump was more worried about the campaign outcome or worried about how this might look to his family, to his friends, to his wife, Melania. Cohen also asked Trump, how's things going to go upstairs, meaning with Melania. Trump told Cohen, how long do you think it's going to be on the market for? He said, not long. Cohen says he was not thinking about Melania. He was thinking about the campaign, and these conversations were on the phone and in person. We also, I thought, which was so interesting, and this might have been new, I think, to all of us, that Cohen testified that after the Access Hollywood tape, that it was Melania's idea to come up with the kind of excuse that was bandied about at the time, that this was, locker room talk, so to speak here. So you're also getting a glimpse into kind of Melania's frame of mind as well here. So I thought that was interesting. Did you?
Oh, I thought it was fascinating to hear that, Melania's suggestion that it was locker room talk. But I think there was some testimony, both from Pecker and from Hope Hicks, that Trump was worried about Melania. Otherwise, why would he gather up those newspapers? And ultimately, I mean, Melania is a human being. She doesn't want to be embarrassed publicly by her husband, regardless of whatever arrangement they have. And there were so many fascinating insights from Cohen today. Hearing him testify, for instance, that Trump doesn't use email, and we knew this, but the reason he doesn't use email is because he knows people have been sued or prosecuted based on email. So a lot of these conversations happened in person, happened over the phone, and there's not a lot of documentary evidence to support what Cohen is saying.
Nima, I always ask you, kind of getting a pulse check, taking a step back in the trial, who has the upper hand? Is it the prosecution? Is it the defense right now? And I want to lay out what has happened over the last week. I believe there were 2 motions for a mistrial by Todd Blanche. Those were denied. There was a motion to alter the gag order in order for, Trump to kind of respond to some of these attacks, by Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. That was denied. There was a motion by the Trump defense team to subpoena materials in the possession of Mark Pomerantz, who was a former prosecutor in DA Alvin Bragg's office. He wrote a book about all of this. That was denied as well here. Is this the prosecution's case right now or no?
I think the prosecution does have the better case, but we know the defense hasn't started their case in chief yet, so we've sort of heard a one-sided account plus the cross-examination. Taking those motions in order, though, I don't think there was a good faith basis for a mistrial when the defense failed to object. You fail to object as an attorney, you waive your objection, either on appeal or in a mistrial motion. So they should have been objecting early and often to Stormy Daniels' testimony. What they did was too little, too late. So I believe they waived that. I think Trump did have a much better argument to modify the gag order. There's something called fair response. And I think one of the reasons so many senators came out and to support Donald Trump is because Donald Trump couldn't say that himself. He's subject to a gag order. So he got some of his friends to show up and say what he couldn't. I think if again violated the gag order so many times, Judge Juan Merchan would have been more willing to allow some sort of response. But I think his concern was, well, if I modify it a little bit, it's going to be blown wide open. Yeah. And with respect to the Pomerantz emails, I don't think any judge is going to allow that. That's more of a selective prosecution argument, and that's really hard to prove. I mean, Hunter Biden is making that same argument right now. You really have to show that the prosecution is for some constitutionally impermissible reason, such as race or religion, national origin. That's very tough to prove, and judges rarely allow discovery into that type of material.
Okay, Nima, I only ask, though, is this just normal for, a defense team to do this on behalf of their client, or is it a sign of how things are going with the trial itself? Am I looking too much into it?
Well, it's normal for Donald Trump. We know he's very litigious and he likes to litigate everything and appeal everything. That's sort of been his MO. So some of it, I think, is just from a client control and client appeasement purpose. Donald Trump wants lawyers who are aggressive, who are going to fight for him at every possible moment. Even if the motion doesn't have a good chance of success, you're representing the former president, that's what you're going to do because that's what he's going to want you to do.
And I also wanted to ask, too, just lastly before we go, this was a big deal today, this testimony, because there was some reporting from our producers in the courtroom that Alvin Bragg himself was there, and he hasn't been there for each and every day of this trial. If you're a juror and you're listening to the Cohen testimony, And you know in the back of your mind that Cohen was convicted, that Cohen has that reputation. How do you set that aside? How do you treat Michael Cohen, you know, as a blank slate up there on the stand? How hard is that?
Very hard. You know, I'm a former prosecutor. I'm looking at someone that's a convicted felon, someone who's an admitted perjurer. I would have a tough time believing them. I would want something independent that corroborates it. And I think the prosecution has provided that. But based on the testimony of Michael Cohen alone, if I were a juror sitting on this case, I would have a very difficult time convicting the former president.
All right. As always, Nima Rahmani, thanks so much. We had to go long on this today, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, and just see you tomorrow.